So welcome back to another review as read. Today we'll be talking about Conquest and Empire, the Reign of Alexander the Great by A.B. Bosworth. Now Professor Bosworth was my university professor on the two courses I did on Alexander the Great in the University of Western Australia when I was in university. And this was one of the recommended readings he gave, of course, for his course on Alexander the Great. The focus of this book is, of course, on Alexander the Great's conquest, basically the full campaign starting from when he was a boy all the way to his death. It's on the narrative, not in particular focus on any one idea like the army and so on. Although there is supplementary material at the back talking about the sources, talking about the change in the army structure as his campaigns went on, his divinity and so on. So today we'll go through the same process. We'll talk about the cons, the pros, and a conclusion. So let's get into it. So first let's get into the cons of the book. Now the first biggest flaw of this book is, I would say, it was definitely written for academics in mind. And to put into perspective very simply, many historians and professors of philosophy, in university time, they say like they're writing a book. They always say like no one's going to read it except their fellow academics. And you can see that very much true in this book with the way the language is written and everything. There are many things in the book, for example, that it's kind of assumed that you should know. For example, what is a ile, a podomoi. Although these are army terms of Alexander the Great, they are explained at the back of the book. So again, it's kind of expected that you read through the book already knowing these things. The other flaw of the book is that there's, of course, since it's going all the way from Alexander's youth all the way to when he died, it's on a whole range of topics as he goes through his life, be it the army, on how he dealt with the Greeks, his campaign, the supply issues at some places, some of the more obscure battles he had, so on and so forth. And what that means, of course, is that when you're reading through, it's not like a YouTube video or whatever where you can skip to what you want. It very much is you have to continue reading. Although there are the headings and everything, the story itself, the narrative, makes it very hard to just skip and say, okay, I want to read about the army, but this army is in almost every other page, so what do you skip? So there are parts where you will read through and you just, to be honest, get bored because there's some things that you're just not interested in. But at the same time, he has to go into a lot of detail because, again, this book is written for academics, and he has to be very fair in the way that he has to give the context and of course the backing evidence for every single point, which means that a simple supply issue could be at least a page or two long because he has to give what one professor says to the other and so on and so forth. And there is also, to add on to that, a lot of details, such as with the Lamian War, some Greek states which you wouldn't even have heard about, all right, even if you like history of the Greek states, and they have to state how this state did this, and then this particular diplomat went to do that, and this affected this situation, which is a very small thing in the history, but it's important to the historian because it leads to have to trace back to certain why did Alexander made that decision, so on and so forth. And so yeah, it's a lot of small details which, again, if you're not writing a paper or academically studying it, it can get pretty tiring sometimes. The last thing on the cons of the book is the language. Again, this can't be blamed on Professor Bosworth. The thing is, he has to write in this way, and I learned this the hard way because when I was doing history and philosophy, my biggest problem there was my language writing. I tended to write more like, they would say I write more like I'm talking to someone, which is more interesting. But unfortunately, with academic writing, you have to write it in a very dry, so-called format, because you have to be exact in your language. Like example, you can't exactly leave it up to interpretation. You have to say that if he had his left hand cut off, you might even have to go into detail on what kind of slashing motion, or was it a chopping motion. So the language is very dry in the book, all right? No matter how you cut it, it reads very much like just fact upon fact upon fact. And on top of that, because of the fact that he's writing for academics, he does jump into Latin or Greek in some lines with no translation. So it's like, again, I mean, the lines, you kind of get the meaning of the line, but again, you can't get the exact meaning because there's no translation. And again, it stems from the fact that he kind of expects the person reading it already knows Latin or Greek. So let's get into the prose of the book. Now, the prose of the book is, the first thing, of course, is the sources. If you read details from this book, you can be more than assured that you can stand firmly and tell other people the facts of, let's say, when did Alexander change the structure of his army from the one of Philip, for example. The sources also, the bibliography is very good if you want to go into and find good sources to write a particular part of Alexander's campaign, or even focus on the army and so on. The other thing is also, of course, like I said, because he goes into so much detail, you can even find very obscure things. You can actually find the sources for that and then go and look for it. I'll give you one of the examples, is that when Alexander finally had no worries for money, in just one of the reserves, he had 180,000 talents. Now, how much is that? Now, if you go into Roman times or Caesar's times, 20 talents is basically $130,000. And if you change the division, 1 talent is basically 6,500, which if you translate 180,000 talents, it equals to over $1 billion. And that was the reason why Alexander, from that point on, really didn't care about money anymore, because he literally had almost unlimited wealth. So, details like this, which is fantastic. Or how, like, he had founded 70 cities during his campaigns. And of course, on top of that, you get Professor Bosworth's feeling on Alexander, which is more or less, I think, the prevailing view on him was that he was a very great man, a very talented man, but he did gain an army and a situation which was very beneficial to him. Philip definitely did a lot of the legwork for the army, innovating it and so on. Although Alexander was a military genius, he cannot be denied. Professor Bosworth also states that how he's very much short-term thinker. Everything about him was so that he could move on to the campaign. When, example, he talks about how did Alexander really care about merging East and West, it was like, is more maybe the reason was, one, that the Easterners tended to give him that divinity which he desired, and the other was because if he used the satrap system and everything like that, he could get moving quickly rather than set up a whole new way of government in Persia. And of course, if you do find a part in the book that you like, you can be assured of very nice details. For example, in the back, there's a short supplement on the army and how it changed from Philip's time, and that was absolutely interesting, personally, because I liked the army stuff. Example, how he changed to the Elay and everything like that. And and again, from here you can lead into so much more other readings which increase your personal knowledge on a topic that's really interesting to you, which of course Alexander the Great had a very interesting life. In conclusion, this book has very good details, but I just can't recommend it for everybody, and I won't lie, I probably would never read this book in full again. I probably would only use it, for example, reference. Example, you want to know what Harpalus did, which is Alexander's treasurer who stole from him. But the thing is, the language and how it read and everything is just, to be honest, at many points of time, it took me a long time to finish this book, because at several points of the book, I got, to be honest, bored, but that was not any fault of the book. He did write it for an audience that was academic, and he had to write in a language that was academic. So, unless you're really, really interested in doing, like I said, academic stuff or very detailed studies, I would say if you get this book, use it for reference, but not for reading for pleasure, in my view. So thank you very much. Till next word.